Welcome to Approaches to Listening. I'm William Taylor, the host and author. Episode 6, The Big Picture. In today's episode, I'm going to focus on the feeling filters, exploration, and experience. These filters are especially tricky to discuss, as feelings are prone to resist words. However, this episode does lay out the clearest path I know to combine all 4 listening filters into one listening experience. Today I'd like to start with a quote about feeling from Dr. Jordan Peterson. Quote, "Feelings can orient you in the world. They give us a first-pass, low-resolution, quick, instinct-laden manner of evaluating the world." End quote. There are 2 elements of this statement that fascinate me, especially when combined together. First, feelings orient us in the world. And second, that feeling-based orientation begins in a low-resolution format. Most musicians are led to music by feelings. As a teen, I remember listening to my favorite piano works each night as I went to sleep. It was one of my favorite parts of the day. I felt the music so powerfully, and those feelings led me to study it and make my career in it. Going back to my earliest episodes, I've seen many music programs that foster a disconnect from feeling in music. There are many side effects to this, but here's one in particular. Academic musicians become detail-oriented musicians in an incredibly myopic way. An idea I'll explain later in this episode. By way of introduction, I will put this thought out for your consideration. Feeling connects us to the big picture better than thinking. I was drawn to the opening quote from Jordan Peterson as I considered approaches to listening, and in today's episode I will focus on how to intentionally form a low-resolution idea from a listening standpoint. From there, I'll present my ideas on how to enhance it to a high-resolution conception and how best to utilize a high-resolution conception of a piece of music. And I'll do that by focusing primarily on the feeling filters. Feeling and thinking are separate parts of a whole, and neither is complete in isolation. With feeling alone, it is impossible to change a low-resolution conception into a high-resolution idea. Thinking gives us the process to achieve that goal, but, if not used carefully, can separate us from the big picture that orients the details. Here's a summary of the process. Feeling gives you a low-resolution conception of a piece of music. Analysis refines it, generally piece by piece, until it's a high-resolution idea. And this is where academic musicians tend to get in a rut. Being so well-versed in analysis, we get stuck there. This is where feeling isn't properly used. After you have that high-resolution idea, we don't often return to feeling, where we could take in our high-resolution idea in context of the big picture. So analysis and critique help you refine that idea piece by piece, but it might be impossible to see the whole scope of the work while only using analysis and critique. I think it is. Everything in music should be approached in context of the big picture. I can't think of a single example that convinces me otherwise. Feeling is the key to conceiving the big picture, and the reason why that's so is because we can take a wide view of what's happening in the music, something that's impossible when analyzing or critiquing. For example, were you analyzing the counterpoint or the harmonic progression? Were you critiquing the tone or the rhythmic vitality? The thinking filters are detail-oriented, and focus on a detail means adopting a narrower viewpoint. Focusing on one thing necessarily means sacrificing your focus on another. In the words of Jordan Peterson, what you aim at determines what you see. While approaching music by feeling, there's room for everything to be present, as it covers a much broader scope. The big picture. You can stitch a big picture together through analysis. You can connect the right moments through thinking, but you'll be out of time. Thinking takes you out of the moment, and the big picture has to be a living thing, which means it's only truly found in the moment. Thought alone can't bring music to life, but it can refine what's brought to life through the music, and as such is vital to optimal music making and optimal listening. That's the context I'd like to discuss the feeling filters in today. How to form a low resolution, big picture idea through both exploration and experience. From there, I'll discuss how to transform it into a high resolution idea and still engage with it through feeling. Let's begin by talking about how we can form a low resolution, big picture conception with exploration. When you practice exploration, you're practicing opening yourself up. You're widening your perception. It could be considered an active state of vulnerability. So what are you listening to? Or what are you trying to connect with as you explore in that vulnerable stage? Everything, but nothing specific. It's like extreme curiosity mixed with trust. Exploring a piece you're listening to for the first time means you don't get to stop and pin elements down, or even choose something specific to connect with. You get to hold the entire work in your mind and body. It's a journey, and the bigger the piece, the more potential you have to listen, and the more you have to hold. There will be an enormous difference in the demands of exploration based on the musical work you'll listen to. It's not hard to explore a piece like the main theme of The Avengers. Mahler's Second Symphony, on the other hand, is extremely daunting because of its length and musical density. Academic musicians tend to build their conception of musical works in high-resolution pieces. We start with form, motif, genre, instrumentation, style, and so on, all concrete, measurable building blocks. Is there anything wrong with that? I think there is, because we're not starting in context of the big picture or whole scope of the work. Let's go a layer deeper. What's the problem with not beginning with the big picture? Our work begins without an optimal purpose and without an orientation or a frame of reference. When we can only build off what we have, we need a big picture to start, or we have little to no chance of building something organic and meaningful. Think about it. If you start forming your conception of a musical work with pieces, then you'll be restricted to using the pieces you can name and identify. If you don't know what it is or the rules that govern it, then you won't know how it fits in. Also, if we start this process with pieces, then what binds those pieces together into a whole, especially if we're, very likely, missing elements that resist being named? It's far more likely that we'll end up with a series of semi-connected, high-resolution fragments instead of an organic, whole work. Even though everything we have might be high resolution, we won't have everything that makes up a piece of music. Most academic musicians could back up everything they do with musical explanations, and they'll have discernible justifications for the score being what it is. But what about the big picture, the full scope or purpose of the music? It's one of those vitally important things that can't be counted but makes all the difference. I also think that the big picture or purpose of the piece is different for everyone, but no less vital because of that. While I could give you my big picture of a work, or help you deepen your conception of your own big picture, it's most important to realize that there is no right answer for what the big picture is. But there are some right questions. Here are some of mine. What do you hear in this music? What's the potential of this music? Is this music good? Why is this music good? The important thing is not to be able to provide a concrete answer to these questions. It's to ask and see what the question yields, especially what it yields in terms of feeling. This is where you'll find your low-resolution conception of a piece as you begin exploring a work. There's something uncomfortable about having a low-resolution conception, and that's great, because exploration is only one of the first steps in the process of coming to know a piece. However, most musicians are far more comfortable saying, "I love the seventh chords when the strings come in," than saying, "I felt this piece is all about setting us up for a grand story." Now, another note about the low-resolution conception. It only has to be just that for a tiny window of time, when you listen to the piece and just after the piece is over. Once you've taken in the whole picture, then you can fill it out, piece everything and anything together in greater detail. But you'll do it at the right time and in the right way. You do this after the work, out of the moment of the work per se, but now it can be done in context of the big or complete picture. My favorite film is The Wind Rises by Japanese director Hayao Miyazaki, a film that came out in 2013 but wasn't released in the United States until 2014. I waited for months to watch this film, and still remember the day I finally got to view it. Through some stroke of luck, I found a massive window of exploration through the 126-minute film, and at its conclusion, I was stunned. There was so much to think about, so much to feel, but I didn't let go of the moment in the film, so I hadn't had any time to digest it. I've spent the last decade taking in this work. I've watched it again and again and again, and I've always gotten more out of it. But I set myself up right. At the first encounter, I explored it as thoroughly as I could, and walked away with a low-resolution, big-picture conception that absolutely gnawed at me to figure the film out in the best possible way. That's exploration's job. That's how it sets you up to have an optimal relationship with a work or idea. And one of the remarkable byproducts of exploration is this: it will never leave you satisfied. It sets you up to want more and gives you the frame that can accommodate everything. So what happens once you have a high-resolution idea of a piece? Is exploration done? It doesn't have to be. So how do you explore a piece you already know, especially one that you've analyzed and now have a high-resolution conception of? Here's one of the best parts about exploration. It puts you in charge. You choose when to stop exploring by connecting with something specific, or narrowing your focus to experience instead of explore. Without exploration, you're restricted to either what you know and trust, or you're restricted to wait for fate to direct your attention to something new. Without exploration, there's no promise of something more, just the reassurance of having what you already know and like. Most often in my listening, exploration sets me up. It widens my perception, and then I latch onto something that begs for my attention. It's like exploration opens my mind or heart, and the other filters provide what will fill it. Staying in a state of exploration is hard, very hard, especially if it's a piece you know and love. There's so many things that will pull on you, begging for your attention, saying, "Name me," or "Experience me." The more you know, the more those things will reach out to you. So how do you explore a piece that you know in a high-resolution way? You take in everything. without latching on to anything specific. You start with a blank canvas. You see what colors and textures appear until something grabs your attention or you choose to connect with it. Exploration will often feel like a pause in the listening process because you're not connecting to something specific. But that's because you're looking for that specific thing to connect to. When exploring, you're in charge, but you're in charge in context of the big picture, and that opens you up to the full potential of the feeling filters. I don't think exploration is meant to be used all the time. Like critique, I think there are windows where this filter is appropriate. I do think there are far more applications for exploration than for critique. So here's how to know if you should turn on the exploration filter. Turn it on when you can't get into a piece. Whether it's a piece you know and love, or one you don't know, or one you've decided you don't like. That's when you explore. When you know there's more, but can't seem to find it, zoom out, explore, until you see either how or why what you love in the music fits into the big picture. Then you can connect to it more completely. Up to now, I've focused on how exploration should appear in listening. It must happen in the moment. How does exploration tie into musical performance? I've said that critique should come after a performance, not during, and it obviously can't come before. But before a performance is a great time to practice some exploration. I once worked with a teacher who told me not to regurgitate my practice when I get to a performance. In other words, don't practice in one set way and then feel and think that putting that on stage is the optimal form of music making. Meet the moment and use your skills and talents to react accordingly. I believe that idea, and the reason why I believe it is because all my best and most memorable musical experiences have come as I practiced that flexibility in performance. Exploration is a huge part of that. So how do you explore before a performance? Do you study the score, imagine the music in your head, listen to recordings? It could be any of those, but here's the marker of true exploration. It will connect you to the big picture. Hopefully you have a high-resolution conception of the piece come performance time, but high resolution or low, it's always better to perform in context of the big picture. Over the years, I've developed a practice of doing my best to put my collaborative partners at ease before we perform together, and one of the elements I've thrown into this process is trying to remind my collaborative partners about the big picture. And since these works are collaborative, the big picture works best when we find it together, or at least agree on it. While working as a staff pianist, I was once performing an aria from Mozart's Magic Flute, sung by Papageno. I sensed the baritone was slightly nervous, so I asked him, "Give me less than 3 words to describe the mood you want us to capture in this performance." He thought for a second, then smiled and said, "Lovesick Puppy." And Lovesick Puppy was what the audience got. Right before we performed, we explored a bit and remembered the big picture and performed in context of that big picture. Exploration is invaluable in finding that wide view, so no matter how proficient we are with a piece, or no matter how high the resolution of our understanding, exploration always has something to offer, and you won't know what that is until you zoom out. So how does experience play into this low resolution or high resolution big picture idea? This actually ties into a thought that I've pondered for years from Daniel Barenboim. I once found a short YouTube clip titled "How to Listen to Music," Daniel Barenboim. In that clip, he says this about listening to music, quote, "You hang on to the first note you hear, and you fly with the music until the last note," end quote. To me, this is listening through feeling. It's different from exploration in one key way. In exploration, you only take a wide view. Specifics interrupt exploration. While using the experience filter, you take a wide view, not as wide as exploration, but wider than a thinking filter, and follow any specific element that captures your fancy within that view. In this type of listening, there's typically a moment that convinces you the piece is worth listening to. Imagine listening to the Hotel California by the Eagles. You enjoy it generally and are like, yeah, this is great. Then the guitar solo reaches its apex, and all of a sudden you say, I love this piece. I had a composition teacher who once said, a moment can make a piece. And that's very true, partially because that moment will be the point of greatest connection between the piece and the audience. This is how most people engage with popular music, a low resolution, wide view based on feeling. In this type of approach, it's common to rely on overt elements, strong beats, straightforward messages, and beautiful melodies and huge arrivals. Approaching denser music like this is not as satisfying. Going back to Mahler's Second Symphony, there's too much information for a low-resolution conception to be satisfactory. That's why we, again, tend to learn these bigger pieces in high-definition chunks, because it's a more comfortable and quantifiable approach. So low-resolution, big-picture listening is all about catching the highlights in the moment. It's an easy and generous approach to music, but it's also the approach that I combat the most. In my experience, a lot of people have the bulk of their musical experiences right in this zone. But there's more than anyone knows if you can find more nuanced approaches to listening. And that leads me to one of the most optimized forms of listening to music that I can find, using the experiential filter in a high-resolution, big-picture context. Say you have a favorite concerto. For me, it's the Brahms Piano Concerto No. 2. I know that piece quite well, all 50 minutes of it, and over the years I've refined my conception of it from low resolution to high as I've listened, re-listened, and even written a major essay about the work. When I listen to this work now, I know what elements are there in great detail. I know the big picture, the scope and grandeur of the work. So how do I optimally connect with the music? Here, I take Barenboim's advice. I fly with the music by hanging on to the first note all the way to the work's end. Flying with the music is a feeling, and the experiential filter is our access point. Even better than simply experiencing the work, the higher resolution your conception, the more flexibility and choice you have as you listen to the work. You know the elements of the piece in great detail. You know how they relate and connect, so you can choose not only how you listen, but what you will hear. When you know all of that in context of the big picture, that is the summation of all four filters of listening. In the moment listening through feeling that is fully supported by your thinking. I cannot recommend arriving at this point of listening highly enough. It is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of re-listening to music, a unique privilege that musicians have today. This approach to listening incorporates the best of experience and analysis, and is well framed by exploration and critique. I'll close with this thought by Barenboim. Music is everything at the same time. Music never laughs or smiles. Music never cries. It always smiles and cries at the same time. If music is everything at the same time, and I believe it is, then the key to receiving our wants, needs, and hopes from music is found in our approach to listening. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support me or see more of my work, please visit my Patreon page or submit your email to my newsletter. The links will be in the show notes.